Welcome back, everyone. We're going to start off this playlist with probably the easiest video in the playlist. We're going to cover do, try, catch, and throws. These are 4 keywords that are not new to Swift or Swift Concurrency, but they're probably new to this channel. I have not really used them or covered them in detail on this channel, so I want to address these first before we start using them in every video going forward. These keywords have not come up much so far on my channel, but they are very important and used almost every single time we write asynchronous code using Swift Concurrency. So many of you probably already know what these keywords do, but one thing that we're going to look at in this video, which is pretty interesting, is sort of like the evolution of Swift. Instead of just showing you guys how to use the keywords, we're going to talk a little bit about why we're using these keywords, because the why is almost more important here. The why helps us understand why we want to use these in Swift Concurrency and going forward.
All right, welcome back, everyone. It has been a while since I've made a video, so excuse me if I'm a bit rusty, but let's jump back in here. Let's open up Xcode. Let's start a new project. I'm going to create a new Xcode project, and just like all the other bootcamp playlists, we are just going to create a regular app here. I'm going to call this one Swift Concurrency Bootcamp, and I'm not so concerned with the team or organization identifier or the bundle ID because we are not putting this into the App Store, but it is important to make sure that our interface is in Swift UI and our language, of course, is Swift. What else would we be coding in, right, guys? We are not going to use core data. We are not going to write tests. Maybe we'll write tests later, but I'm not going to do that for a while. So we'll leave those unchecked. Let's click next. Let's find a place to save this on your computer. Go ahead and click create. Once we are inside, I'm going to make this full screen. Let's get that simulator working and let's get coding. I'm going to switch my simulator up here to iPhone 13 just because it looks way better than the iPod Touch. Don't know why that is the Xcode default. And we're not going to use the content view, but we're going to create a new file for this video. So let's right click the navigator, create a new file. It'll be a Swift UI view. Let's call this one do catch try throws bootcamp. Click create, and once you're inside there, let's click resume on the canvas one more time and get coding. And as I kind of pointed out earlier, what we're covering in this video is not actually new to async await, but we are covering keywords that we use in async await a lot. And on my channel, at least, I haven't covered them that often because we haven't really used a lot of these keywords, at least until async await. So what we're going to cover in this video is do catch statements, as well as the try keyword and the throws keyword. And as you guys are going to see, all these keywords kind of work together. So that's why I'm putting them all into one big video here. And I'm going to move a little quickly here because a lot of the stuff we're going to do should not be new to you guys. So let's start by creating a view model for this view. So let's create a class. Let's call it a do try catch throws bootcamp view model. Let's conform to observable object, and let's initialize one in our view with an @state object private var VM, and we'll set it equal to do catch try throws bootcamp view model. I'm going to actually start calling my view models in this playlist rather than VM. I think it's just a little bit more clear for anyone who's just joining. And we're going to start super simple. So in the view model, let's create an @published var, let's call it text of type string, and I'll set it equal to starting text. I'm going to put that on the screen. So in here, we'll call view model dot text, and there shouldn't be an S here. Let's give this a quick frame with maybe a width of 300, a height of 300, and I'm going to give it a background color of color.blue. Just doing this because I just want to be able to see it on the simulator here. I don't really care what the view looks like in this video. And we're going to do a very simple .onTap gesture, and then we're going to perform a function. So in our view model here, let's create a func called fetch title, open close parentheses, open the brackets. Let's call this from our tap gesture. So in here, we'll call viewModel.fetchTitle. When we fetch a title, we want to update this text, but generally in your actual app, you're not going to really do your entire fetch request inside your view model. You probably have another class, a manager class or a data storage class or some sort of, data loader, and that's where you're going to get your data from. So let's simulate that. Let's create another class. Let's call this one maybe do try catch throws bootcamp. Let's call it data manager, and we'll open the brackets. And in here, we are going to have another function that says maybe get title, and this function will then return a string. So in here, let's just return new text. Why not? Let's get a reference to this manager inside our view model. So we'll say let manager equals do try catch throws bootcamp data manager. What a mouthful. Generally, of course, we're not going to initialize this in our view model. We're going to inject this. I do have a video on dependency injection on the channel if you want to check that one out. But now that we have this reference inside here, we're going to call manager.getTitle. It's returning us a string, so we're going to say let new title equals that, and then we'll set self.text equal to the new title. Cool, I'm going to click resume on the canvas here. I'm going to press play and then tap on our box, and we got our new text. You guys probably already noticed that we have not used any of these keywords yet, and that's because we're going to build up to using these keywords, because I want to really explain to you guys why we use these keywords, not just how to use them. Once you understand why, it actually makes a lot more sense on why we then want to use these in Swift concurrency. So as a developer, this is great. This is all working perfectly. But the question is, what if we go to fetch our title and maybe sometimes we don't actually get a string back? Maybe there was an error or a problem fetching that title. Well, how could we improve our code here? So let's simulate that error. We'll say maybe let is active of type bool. We'll set it equal to false. And just to simulate, so maybe when we call get title, we check if is active. And if active is true, we return the new text. If not, we'll do something else. So in here, we'll add if is active, and then we'll return our new text, and we'll say else. And if it is not active, let's then return nothing. So we're going to return nil. So we can improve this by then returning, making it optional. And then in our code down here, we could just very simply check if let new title equals new title, and then we can put our code in here. So again, I'm going to click play here. I'm going to click on this. And as you probably can see already, if I click and press on this, nothing is changing. And that's because is active is false. So we're returning nil, and then nothing's happening in our app. So already off the bat, we can see that there are limitations to just returning an optional, right? As a developer, we know that is returning optional because it failed to get the text. But if you're sharing this code, if other people are using this code, that's not very clear. And it might look like a bug in your application if maybe things are just not updating, right? So oftentimes, instead of just returning nil from a function, we want to take it a step further and maybe return an error instead. So an easy way to do that would be maybe from this function, instead of just returning a string, let's return maybe two pieces of data. We'll return a title as well as an error. And we'll make this optional, right? So now we can get a title and we can get an error. So if is active is true, let's return new text. And of course our error will be nil. And in our else, we're gonna say nil for the title, and then we'll throw back an error. And in your actual app, you're gonna wanna use a real, probably a custom error, but we're just gonna use a URL error here, and we're gonna call .bad URL. It doesn't really matter what we're throwing back here. I just want to get this going. And the value we're getting back here is actually a tuple, and we can see that it has a title and also an error. So we could just name this maybe returned value, and we can check if let new title equals returned value dot title. And then we can say else if let error equals returned value dot error. So if we're getting that error back, we'll call self.text and put on the error dot localized description just for a second. So I'm gonna run this one more time, and I'm gonna click on it, and you probably guessed we're getting back that error. This is good. This is a bit better in our code, right? Because now we have the ability to check for real values and also check for errors. But this is kind of a hassle for us as developers, because really we want to return a result here. Either this function should be successful or it should fail. It shouldn't really return us a title and an error, right? We should really probably only be getting one or the other. There's never really a use case where we're going to get both of these. So how can we improve on this even further? So I'm going to create another function here. So I'm going to create another function. I'm going to call it getTitle2, and this will return us a result, and I'll open the brackets. And as you're going to see here, a result is actually a generic type. So we need to provide the success type as well as the error type on failure. So we'll click fix, and the success type that we want to return back is a string, and the error type is just going to be a regular error. Now I'm going to do more or less the same code as we did here. So we'll say if is active, and if it's active, we're going to return success, and that's going to be a string. So we'll say return dot success, and we'll put in that new text. Then we'll say else, and we will return dot failure, and we'll put in our error. So I'm going to put my error back up here, put it into here. So now let's call getTitle2 from our code. So I'm going to actually comment this one out. So I'm going to / asterisk, and down here I'm going to asterisk / do a multi-line comment. And then while I'm clicked right in front of this, I'm going to fold this up with the Option Command left arrow. That you could also go to the editor, go to code folding, and fold that up. I love folding code. It just looks so much cleaner. Now we're going to say let result equals manager.getTitle2, and we can see here that we're getting this result. If you've ever used Combine, and I've done that a lot on this channel, when we use Combine, a lot of times we call sync, and then we have a completion, and we switch on that completion. Usually it's either successful or it's failure. That is a result. That's the same thing that we're getting back here. It's either got a success case or a failure case. So we'll call it getTitle2, and then we want to switch on that result. So I'll say switch, and I'm going to switch on the result, and the case is .success. Let's say let new title, and this will be the title we get back, and we'll say self.text equals new title. And our other case, of course, is failure. We'll say let error. And finally, self.text is going to equal the error.localized description. All right, I'm going to give this just a different error, just so we get a different error message on the screen here. Let's click resume. I'm going to run this one more time, and we should get an error back on the screen again. And there it is. So already our code's a little bit better now, because this is, if you're sharing this with other developers, or even if you're just coming back to this at a later date, it's much more obvious here. If we call this function, it's going to give us either a successful state or a failure state, right? It's no longer giving us back both, and then we have to kind of manage which one is which, and look at both cases and look at all the data. Instead, now we just get back a result, and then we can either can identify very easily if it's a success or a failure. And you're probably thinking at this point, what on earth is this guy talking about? Because he's told us we were going to learn do catch, try throws, and we haven't used any of that in this video. I know we haven't. I was a bit hesitant to even go down this route, but this video is not over, and we're going to jump into it right now. So we can actually basically improve on this even further, right? So right now, every time we call this function, we then have to switch on that result. But really, we know when we're calling this, we either are going to get back a success or a failure. So wouldn't it be nice if this function could just give us back one or the other, and rather than giving us back a result that we have to then check? And that's kind of where try and throws come in. So we're going to create another func here, and it's called getTitle3. You probably guessed it. And let's open the brackets. Now this function, we're going to go back to basics as we did in the first getTitle. We're just going to return a string. We're going to say if is active, and we'll return our new text. And then we'll say else. And the question is, if we can't actually get our data here, how can we then exit out of this function, right? Because we can't just return a string. We don't want to return a nil value. We don't want to return a blank string. Instead, we want to throw an error back out of this function. So the same way we passed an error back here, We call it a failure state here and passed in an error. We just now want to just throw that error back out. And the way we do that is by marking a function as throws, meaning it can throw an error. And then in here, we can very simply throw an error. So I'll call URL error, and we will then use whatever error we are going with here. So the way to read this function is that it is a function called getTitle3 that tries to return us a string, but if it fails, it will throw us an error. So that's the beauty of throws, right? So instead of returning a result and then switching on the success and the failure, we can just return a string or throw an error. So let's use this in our code now. I'm going to come down here. I'm going to make another multi-line comment and fold this one up as well. And let's do this one more time. We're going to say let new title equals manager dot get title 3. And you can see here when we call this that we can see that it throws, very explicit here, and it returns us a string. So the value that we're going to set here is actually going to be the string if it is successful. So I'll call get title 3 here. And now when we do this, we're going to get our first compiler error. It's kind of annoying the first time you hit these, but it's actually so handy because this is literally the compiler telling us how to write our code. We don't have to worry about it as developers if we're doing something wrong. So what this is saying is that this call can throw, but it is not marked with try. And the error is not handled. And that's actually exactly what is going on here. This function is a function that throws us errors, right? And we are going to try to get a string, and if we can't get it, we're going to get back that error. So the way to convey that in our code is to literally try to get the result of this function. So the question then becomes, if we are trying to get it, but we actually run into an error, if this actually throws us back an error, where are we going to catch that error? And you can see here that we're still getting another error here, that our errors thrown are not handled. And that's because we are going to try to run this, but if not, we need a place to catch those errors. So what we do is actually create a do catch statement. And you can see when you create a do catch, the first thing is inside the do is all of your tries, and then there is a catch where you're going to catch all of your errors. So I'm going to take this code, put it inside the do here, and then we can catch our errors. So in our catch block, we can then name the error if we want to give it a local name. So we'll say let error, and then in here we can do what we've done before. We'll say self.text equals the error.localized description. Inside this do, if we do get this new title, let's then just set that to the text. So we'll say self.text equals new title. Let's click resume. Let's do this one more time, and we should get that error back here. Awesome. And so now let's take a closer look at this do catch statement. So the do has a do block, and in your do block, you're going to have all of your try calls. These are all of your functions that can throw errors. Now, if there was multiple calls that we needed to try to make here, we can put a bunch of calls in this block. It's not limited to just one try, right? We can keep trying. But if any of these tries were to fail, we are immediately going to exit out of this do block and jump into the catch block. And I'll get further into that in a couple minutes. But for right now, we are going to try to get this title. If we are successful in getting this title, we're going to execute this line of code. But if we fail to get this title, this line of code will never execute. And instead, if we fail this, we're going to immediately jump into our catch block. And that comes down here. A really handy thing about these catch blocks is that if we want to just call it error, we actually don't need to even give it a local name here. So we can just, it can just imply that, and we can keep our function working as it is. All right, so we covered do, we covered catch, we covered try, we covered throws. And now I want to run you guys through a couple quick examples of using this try keyword because it is a little bit tricky. So let's create another function up here. Let's just call it getTitle4. In getTitle4, we're going to return, let's say, maybe a final text, just so it's a little bit different, so we know if this one is actually returning here. And let's come back down to our code, and what we're going to do is say let final title equals try manager dot get title for. They're going to say self.text equals final title. So now we have two different try statements inside a single block. And before we run this, let's actually come back up here and make isActive true. So both of these should return values. So this one will be successful as well as this one. So let's run this one more time now. I'm going to click play on the canvas here, and we can see that final text is coming through. So we are running title 3, it's setting the new value, then we're running title 4, and then it's setting the new value as final text. And you can see that this is working perfectly. What I want to show you guys is that if one of these tries fails, the rest of the do block will not even execute. So in this get title 3, let's actually just throw this error every time. So I'm just going to comment this out quickly, and we're just going to throw an error every single time we call get title 3. So we know right now when we call get title 3, it's going to throw an error. We know when we call get title 4, it's going to be successful. But if I run this and I click on it, you're going to see that we get that error back even though get title 4 would have been successful. And that's because, as I was saying, once you fail one of these try statements, you immediately go into the catch block. So if we fail this, we're never going to execute the rest of this. And that's really important. That leads us into the next use of try. You can actually make try optional. And when you make try optional, you're telling the compiler that you actually don't care about the error that's coming back. And instead of getting an error back, if you fail, you'll just set that value as nil. So if I take out this try and I hold the option button and click on new title, we can see that it's of type string. Because this is a hard try, we're going to get back that string. But if I make this try optional, hold the option button and click on new title, we can see that it is an optional string. So again, we're saying here, we don't really care about what error is coming back. If there is an error, we're just going to return nil. So the beauty of using the optional try is that you don't actually need to use it in a do catch because you're not actually going to throw any errors into the catch. So for a lot of simple cases, you could actually just take these. I'm going to copy this, and let's actually remove the question mark here. I'm going to put it up here. So we can say let new title equals try this, and we'll say maybe if let new title equals new title, self.text equals new title. So if I comment this out here and I go to run this, let's see, get title 3 is throwing us an error. So even though it's throwing us an error, we're not actually doing anything with the error. So this will just be optional. When I click this, nothing happens. If I uncomment this code, put this back in here, we can see that it's now working again. So the biggest benefit of the optional try is that firstly, you don't need to do catch block, and then it saves you a bit of time as the developer if you don't really care about that error anyway. Sometimes if you're using like third-party APIs and they're throwing you back errors, but you're not going to actually display that to the user, maybe you don't really care about the errors that are being thrown back. But before we move on, I want to actually show you guys using the optional try in the do catch block. So I'm going to comment this out up here. We're going to make this one optional. We're going to say if let new title equals new title, and we'll put this inside this if let statement. I'm going to make get title 3 fail every single time, just like we had before. So let's comment this back out. Let's throw that error every time. So now we know this will throw an error, but this one will not. And if I run this again and I click on it, you're going to see that final text is coming through. So even though get title 3 is throwing an error now, we are not coming into this catch block. So before we threw an error, we did not run any of this code, and we just jumped into the catch block. But here, because we marked this try as optional, we're not actually going to throw the error. We're not going to actually catch that error. So even though it's technically throwing an error from the function up here, we marked it as optional, so we're not actually going to throw it out of the do block. I hope that is clear. On this same note, you can also explicitly unwrap a try. So I could do something like this, and then the new title will be a string 100% of the time. We don't need to unwrap it at all. Now again, explicit unwraps are super dangerous. I do not use them in code. I do not recommend using them, but I wanted to show you guys that they are there. I'm going to comment that back out. And I think I'm going to wrap up this video there. Decently long video here. We didn't cover anything related to async await, but most of our asynchronous code and our asynchronous functions are going to actually be functions that throw errors. So this syntax is going to be really, really common in async await. And when you're using throws, you're almost always using do catch statements. So this code is going to be super common in all the videos going forward, and that's why I wanted to cover this first. I hope that does clear it up for some of you, because I haven't covered this on my channel before. Honestly, we don't really use these keywords very much outside of async await. At least I haven't very often on this channel. So there it is. There you have it. We covered do catch, try, throws, some really powerful stuff here. And in the next video, I think it might be time to actually jump into async await. Thank you guys for watching. As always, I'm Nick. This is Swiftful Thinking, and I'll see you in the next video.